Babble with Ben.
This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be participating today. Welcome to the Babble, Alix Bradfield.
Thank you, Ben. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. It's good to have you on. You have been someone I've been wanting to have on this show, I think, since its very conception. So it's very nice to have you on to not only talk about what you've been up to, but also I'd love to hear more about Energy for Life, your book that you've got right there.
Thank you, Ben. I feel very energetic about talking about it.
Very good. Now, this is all about a holistic approach to health, and you've consulted with quite a few people about the best approach to that. I guess I'll ask the question that I assume everyone else asks, and, what was the seed for this book? When did you think that you could help people by sharing your experiences with this book?
Okay, there are three reasons for that. One is that I am, just like all of us, very grateful to the medical profession. Whenever we have a major problem, they're there with all their experience and all their qualifications. However, they don't seem to have the time to spend with us to talk about how to stay well. Mm. And in fact, the book, I originally called it Staying Well, and then the publishers changed it to Energy for Life with its bright yellow cover, which I love. I mean, that was all their design, and I thought, yeah, that was great. So part of it was because I think the more we all know about looking after ourselves, the better off we'll be. Secondly, my parents, I don't know if you know this, Ben, but they were the oldest couple in Australia with 206 years between them. And that's sort of a phenomenon in itself.
It's extraordinary, yeah.
Their family tree did not indicate that everybody lived that, had that longevity. So I became increasingly sort of curious about, well, was it something to do with lifestyle? How did they live their lives? And so I looked at all of that in detail. The third reason is I personally love feeling well. I like waking up after a good night's sleep, having lots of energy to do the things I want to do. And I'm just thinking now about one person said about the book, but isn't sort of caring about your own health a bit self-obsessed? and it made me think. It set me right back, and I started to think about it and thought, well, no, I don't think it is. To me, it's the foundation of everything we do. You love music. Well, if you're not well, you can't put yourself into your music, your work. You can't help other people. So to me, it's just, I love feeling well and energetic, and I think most people do.
I think, in fact, you are looking after other people just as much as yourself when you keep yourself well, because as you were talking about having health professionals involved, right? Like if you are able to keep yourself out of the medical system, that relieves those resources for people that you might have something unavoidable as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, I don't think it's selfish or self-absorbed at all. I think it's, in fact, really sort of aware and considerate.
Well, I hope so. That's how I see it myself, yes.
It does depend on how many selfies you put up, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You were talking about how you I think I helped you set up your Instagram account, and you were talking about the learning curve that was involved, and you were talking about doing your first reels as well.
Well, I haven't done any reels yet. I do post, not constantly, but I like Instagram, and I'm part of an Iceberger group.
Yes.
And that we have actually that's WhatsApp, but it's another version where every day, whoever is down there first, and it tends to be one couple, they post the sunrise, the waves, and if I'm not around, I just love looking at that and sharing it in that way. So I think social media has a great, it has lots to offer, if it's not overdone perhaps, or if it's in good heart.
I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, isn't it? Like when you have those good intentions with social media, yeah, people can tell, can't they? It's not, I know with my own social media, I initially, and probably still do, get very much caught up in how many people saw it, how many people interacted with it. And, your mental health can suffer as a result. And so I found that, for example, during the school break, which we just had, right, all I would be doing is, looking at the numbers on social media. And I'd think, oh, gosh, those numbers are down from last month or whatever, and you'd be beating yourself up. But then I came into campus and people that I actually knew and had watched the podcast or interacted with the music would be like, hey, that was really great. And one real person can be every bit as validating as 1,000 numbers on a screen.
Well, perhaps more so.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people are missing that human touch and actually sitting down with someone and talking to them face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I know when we first talked about this podcast, there was some talk about whether you'd be able to come in via Zoom or on the phone or something like that. But I think that that face-to-face interaction really is quite valuable.
Yeah, it is indeed. This is a subject in itself, isn't it? The face-to-face. Now, all the people in the book I interviewed, it was during lockdown, so it was not face-to-face. It was either on Zoom or on a phone call or something. So that just had to be. But I know almost all of them I know quite well, and they've helped me. So that was another reason I wanted to. Well, they've helped me, and they do great things, and please take advantage of it. Whether people. To me, it's a book that people can have on their bedside table, pick up, read a chapter. They're short chapters, put it down, think, well, I'm not sure there's anything in there that suits me, but then somewhere there's something. I can do that. I can do that. So, so I talked to people on the phone or on Zoom, and then they would chat to me about what they do and what they offer, and then I'd write it all down, then I'd send it back to them, because who knows whether what I heard was what they said.
Yes, yeah.
Communication,
yes.
which was another part of my life. Communication is fraught. We think we're very clear when we say something to someone else, but they have their filters and their interpretations, and maybe they come up with something you didn't really intend. So I wanted to make sure that I represented them as they wanted to be represented.
I think that's very considerate. I think that's essential, in fact, definitely. Who did you have who's in the book? Who are some of the characters?
Well, some of them are traditional medicos. We have a dermatologist talking about our skin. And I thought, we live in an era now, we're talking about social media, but we also live in an era where even young people are going for plastic surgery and to me, very unnatural things. One of his main messages, the dermatologist, was keep out of the sun. Watch the sun. It's pretty simple. Protect yourself from the sun. So there were people like him. There was an optometrist talking about looking after our eyes. And one of the simple things I learned from him was, or that I try to practice, I have a little Post-it in front of my computer that says 20-20-20. Because what he is recommending is don't be looking at your screens all the time, just in terms of your eyes. And every 20 seconds, look away 20 meters or something for every 20 minutes, look away 20 meters for 20 seconds or something to break that screen attachment. Now, if you're very focused on your work, which we get to, you forget to take a break and let your eyes take a break. So there are tips like that. There is an audiologist talking about our very precious hearing. I mean, imagine your love of music, and if you couldn't hear music, and conversation, and so our hearing is very precious, and sometimes we can forget about that. There's a podiatrist who talks about our feet. If you think about those poor little feet at the bottom of our body holding up our entire weight all the time, and how little we think about them. But if a foot is hurt and you can't walk, it's a real problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. In fact, when I did Tai Chi for a few years, maybe a decade ago, there was a saying that human beings get sick from their feet up. Once you start having problems with your feet, then it involves ankle problems, and then it's knee problems, and then it's hip problems, and then it's back problems. And so it's very easy to neglect your feet, but it really is, the key to health in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, it is. And of course, what you're pointing out too is that we're all connected. You know, quite often you might have a pain in your shoulder, which is actually coming from your hip. And then it came up a number of times in the book from different people talking about the indivisibility of your psyche and your physical being. I'm not sure everybody takes that into account enough. So if we're really upset psychologically about something, we can get sick, vice versa. It's all one system.
Very much so. I have been seeing a psychologist over the last 12 months, and one of the things that he is always reminding me to do is if I'm feeling distressed or overwhelmed or like I'm not handling things, one of the first things he says is you've got to check in with your body. You've got to find out, classic thing is that when I'm stressed, my shoulders tense up, 100%. And vice versa too. Like, for example, if I am in the middle of doing a big project, which involves a lot of work on the computer, quite often it's, using the mouse for, I was when you were talking about your 20-20-20 rule, I was like, gosh, there's been so many times where I will be working on the computer and
for hours
without even realizing it. Like I might start at 1 o'clock after lunch, and then all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock. I've been sitting down. My rotator cuff gets sore because there's all this really fine movement. My back gets sore because it hasn't moved. It's sort of locked in this one position, and all of a sudden I'm in a really bad mood. And so I think your comment about really mental and physical health being indivisible, I think that's 100% true.
Yes, and it came up quite often from different people who have different fields of expertise. And at one point, the editor I was working with said, there's a little repetition here between people. It's too much repetition. And I said, well, I think that's really important. She did take a few things out, which were, but that was one of them. That it's indivisible. Our body, our soul, our mind. It's all our emotions. It's all one system. Very much so. So some people do things like set a timer or your watch so it rings every once in a while. It's difficult though, isn't it, Ben? Because when you're working, you're really focused. You're achieving something. And sometimes when our focus is broken, we go away and come back. You have to start again to get into whatever you're doing.
Yes.
So it is tricky, but it's also probably essential for the well-being of our body.
I think so, because I'm definitely part of the reason that I get stuck in front of the computer for hours is I'll leave things to the last minute. And so it'll be like, okay, this is due at midnight on Sunday night. And there really isn't that time to, take care of yourself. And part of what I've been doing recently is just allowing that extra time between tasks, which I think is very beneficial to health too. Like, it used to be I'd line up tasks. So, let's say I was visiting someone helping with their computer, right? I'd be like, okay, well, they're both in South Yarra, so I'll go, boom, half an hour. Maybe I'll get to eat lunch in the car outside their house before I go in. And now I'm like, no, cool, give yourself, like an hour.
A break in between.
Yeah. And it just means that you can work more efficiently, and it means you're taking care of yourself. You're working in a more sustainable fashion too.
Well, Ben, you've met my husband. He's been.
I have.
He's done that. He's done that all his life, much to my bewilderment and interest. That I can remember even when we were in the early years of our marriage, and we're coming up to nearly 55 years.
Congratulations!
You can believe it.
Yeah.
But I'd say, John and Sally called. They want us to come for dinner on Wednesday, and he'd say, well, oh look, we're out on Monday and Tuesday night. We don't want to be out 3 nights in a row. And I'd think, well, why not? I'd like to go and see. But he was always taking breaks and managing his time, so he was never completely overwhelmed. And I do admire that. I've never mastered it myself, but I do admire it. It's a way to keep yourself on an even keel. And the other thing he often says is that you need capacity for the unexpected, because the unexpected is always going to happen.
Very much so. Yeah. It really is that self-care, isn't it? Because it's very true. Like, I would consider myself a bit of a people pleaser, definitely. And so I'd be like, like if I can help you today, I won't put it off till tomorrow. But yeah, there is that capacity for if someone needs some extra time, or if something that you're not expecting comes up.
Which always happens.
Yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden you're turning up and to someone that you're trying to help, but you're sort of not mentally prepared, or maybe you're anxious about something else that's happened. And I think, this idea of not being a machine, of just being like, okay, cool, I'm a human being. I'll need a little bit of recovery time and then I'll be at my best.
Yes.
So,
yes.
That's a good advice from Ross, definitely.
Yes, it is. No, well, he's, I do admire and respect the way he leads his life. So, yes, now who else is in the book? Then I've got some interesting people like Trevor Hendy, who's a international Ironman, great success around the world, sort of an icon in people's minds, particularly in that area of sport, and people were at his feet always, and they thought he knew everything about everything because he was so successful in his sport. But he actually felt inside that he was not living a life authentic to who he really was. And he had an epiphany. And he's now doing something called boot camp for the soul.
Really?
So he's changed completely. He's working very much with the inner life and helping other people to live with their inner life. The publishers, because this was all about health, said, oh, what's this chapter doing in here? What's this about? And I said, it's actually terribly important to health. Also, the psychologist in the book was talking about the same thing, our values, what's authentic to us. If we're not living in that space, we're not going to be our energetic, healthy self. And that sometimes takes quite a few years of living, doesn't it, to work out, Now, music is so important to you, for instance. It's not a money spinner. It's not going to make you rich. And yet it's a passion.
Yes.
And some people make a lot of money in their lives but are deeply miserable because they're doing something that's anathema for who they really are.
They're not being authentic.
They're not being authentic. So he's in there. The last chapter, I think I mentioned to you, Ben, was an ICU doctor who you can imagine the strain such a specialist is under all the time. And he was burned out after 20 years, completely burned out. Then he realized that the training he'd had at medical school didn't offer anything to him about looking after himself. So he took a year off, and he and his wife just worked on looking after themselves. They changed to a completely plant-based diet. They learned meditation. They got better at sleeping. There's a sleep chapter in this book. I think a lot of people today are sleep deprived.
I would agree with that. I know that there is a strong correlation between how much sleep I get and how happy I am during the day, 100%.
I mean, I'm not good after one night of not sleeping well. I'm scratchy, I'm impatient, I'm a bit irritable, I can't focus. And how do we feel after a really good night's sleep? And yet most people are sleep deprived now, and I think a lot of them think, well, look, I can function, I can get away with, but I don't know long term if anyone can really get away with poor sleep habits. It does affect us.
It is part of that trend of the glorification of busy. I mean, you would have heard about that too, where people are like, oh, yes, oh, no, I'm functioning on 4.5 hours sleep this week, or, I've got so much. And look, I bought into that 100%. I mean, part of the reason that
we all have.
Exactly. Part of the reason that you and I know each other is that I had a shop repairing computers in Melbourne, right? And when I was doing that, I was in that very much, startup mode, going, okay, cool, well, I've got to make sure that, I put as much energy as possible into this so that it gets established. But I very much neglected my health. I put on a ton of weight. I certainly was neglecting my hobbies, including music.
Music, yeah.
Yeah, oh no, it was definitely put to the one side. And sleep. I mean, I luckily now I have a watch which tells me how much sleep I'm getting, right? And so I've, when I've had a week of 5 hours a night, I certainly feel the difference between the week of 7 hours a night. But ever since I started trying to be more authentic and taking care of myself, it's been a very different life since then. So I think, there really are those lessons to be learned, and it sounds like you've done a very good job of transmitting that knowledge to other people.
Well, I hope so. Changing habits is extremely difficult. And there's a little bit of mention in the book about changing habits. There's also a reference to a man called James Clear. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's written a book called Atomic Habits. And I think that's also excellent material. And I see him on Instagram all the time. He gives some really good advice on it. Where he sends quotes and things, which I like. Habits. So one of the atomic habits, the reason
the smallest,
smallest habits attached to something else you do. So if it's a stretching of the calves that you want to integrate into your life so you don't get plantar fasciitis again or something, do that while you brush your teeth each night, So you just one little thing attached, and that makes it easier. Now, as you know, around New Year's Eve, people decide to they're going to do all these new resolutions which involve changing their job and their partner and their weight and it's too big, too impossible, isn't it, really, for most of us?
Very much so.
So just little changes can make a difference. And I hope there are lots of little tips in this book that people can adapt.
My friend Scott said something very similar. He was like, as part of your New Year's resolution, people will say, okay, well, I'm going to join a gym, I'm going to lose 5 kilos, I'm going to get a six-pack, all that sort of stuff, right? And my friend Scott is saying, okay, those are very great goals, right? But rather than doing, 100 sit-ups on the weekend, right, it's probably more valuable to do 5 every day. Because it's very easy to miss a week's worth. If you just do it once a week, if you miss it that week, it's going to be another week. But if you do it every day, let's say you miss 5 on a Wednesday or something after, seeing friends for a drink on Tuesday, right? Doesn't matter. Get back to it on Thursday.
Yes.
And I've done that before too. Like I've, even with my singing discipline, right? Like I find that when I'm in the zone, I'll do maybe like a half an hour to an hour's worth of stuff every day. But sometimes, for whatever reason, I fall out of it. Even just sitting in front of the computer and doing just the most basic 1 or 2 basic scales or basic exercises, changing those atomic habits, right? Like moving going to the margins, that little bit there. It's essential.
And it's doable.
Exactly.
That's
it's not
the
intimidating.
Thing, it's doable, because if you think I'm going to start exercise, I'm going to run a marathon or something. They're possible to change our habits in little incremental steps.
When we were in the car, I was just thinking about changing habits, right? You are, of course, a very strong proponent of a plant-based diet. Was that a gradual change, or how did that come about? How long is it?
Well, I've actually been vegetarian for either vegetarian or vegan for 40 years now.
Wow. Yeah.
So how did it come about? I've always cared about animals, and increasingly the connection between the animals in a truck and what was on my plate became stronger and stronger. So 37 years I was vegetarian. Now that was easy, Ben. That you can go anywhere and eat vegetarian. That's not a problem. And it's also not seen as unusual, particularly. But then I began to study more and more about health, the environment, animal welfare, and realized that it wasn't enough for me just to be vegetarian. I needed not to have dairy. I needed not to have eggs. And so for the last 3 years, I've been plant-based exclusively. And it is difficult. I'll tell you why it's difficult for me. I'm 78, and I don't know people of my age group who choose to be vegan. It's just a very strange thing. Therefore, I like belonging, like most of us.
Of course.
I like being part of everybody and not strange. But to my friends, I'm a little peculiar. So it's difficult, and also it's difficult sometimes being in a place where totally plant-based is just not the thing.
Yes.
And I feel I'm putting extra pressure on someone who's doing the cooking. If we're invited anywhere, I always say I'll bring my own, quote, meat, unquote, and I can have their rice and salad and whatever, but I bring along my own whatever. And people know now that that's what I do, and so I feel good about that. I'm not inconveniencing them. But it does also take some discipline, as you know, because my health is really important, and therefore what my lifestyle, what I put into my mouth is very important to me. And I've had to learn and think about how you do that when you're totally plant-based.
Well, I know from my own experiences going plant-based. B12 was a very big one. I know I get that measured, at least every 3 months. Iron, the same. I think we were having a bit of a joke in the car about protein levels and about how that's the least of the problems because, there's plenty of sources for protein. But I did find that going from vegetarian to vegan, there was, again, that sort of battle of the micro habits, you know what I mean? Because I found from my own experiences that it was fine during summer. During summer, it was great. But as soon as the leaves started turning red and yellow, right, I would have, on more than one occasion, just had this massive craving for dairy. Gone to the supermarket, bought like a tub of ricotta and just sat down with a spoon and ate the whole thing because I was having this craving for dairy.
What do you think that was? You think that's, the memory of dairy or the something in dairy that your body was craving? Or, I mean, you weren't pregnant, were you? So
No, I don't think so. No. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I think because it was like just an overwhelming thought pattern. Like it was a craving, but I have no idea what specific thing it was.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course they make a lot of non-dairy cheeses and things. I do miss cheese. I think most vegans miss really good cheese, but they've got a lot of. Actually, I was saying to you earlier, I don't go for the new meats and cheeses and things. I did get some cream cheese, quote unquote, or cheese. And, about 6 months later, it's in the fridge looking perfect. And I don't trust that. What is in this? How many preservatives and things to create this artificial? So I try to avoid that stuff. Of nutritional yeast I really like. Do you use that a lot?
I do use that.
Because it's got a kind of a cheesy flavor. It's evidently very nutritious. So you just gradually learn how to do different things. What I'm still trying to learn is plant-based dishes that I can serve to meat eaters that they think, oh, this is delicious. I'm not just doing this for poor Alix. I'm enjoying it. And I haven't really achieved that yet. I think that is one of the very winnable battlefronts for perhaps spreading the benefits of a plant-based diet, is if you can come up with like a real crowd pleaser of a dish. Yes.
For me, it's nachos. I've got this great recipe where I boil up some black beans and I've got, like a fresh sort of salad made from tomato and
like a salsa
capsicum.
sort of thing.
I think it's a pico de gallo or something like that. My Spanish is, of course, non-existent, but it's something I've had at Mexican restaurants before, and it's just one of those great crowd pleasers. And I think that's an essential thing for a vegan to have. And so I think, it sounds like you're on the right path for that.
Yes, but I think if women, for some reason, if I have some people around for lunch and I can make an exquisite soup that sort of is almost like a stew and they just think it's marvelous. Or salads, lots of different wonderful salads in the summer. But I find having people to dinner, including people, they kind of look at their plate. If it doesn't have a chop or a chicken schnitzel or something, they're a bit dubious. But so I haven't completely won the one, but I'm working on it.
No, there is definitely that old, the blokes going, oh, what's this rabbit food that's on the plate? What's this rabbit food Alix has given us? And I don't know why, because it's definitely a well-observed phenomenon that there is sort of a macho pride in having some meat on your plate. I was definitely guilty of that. I remember as a teenager when I was still eating meat. Like, I'd be like, oh, what's this? Where's the meat? Where's the, and I remember, if I was given, let's say, a chop with mashed potatoes and peas, right? I'd make sure I'd eat the peas first because I like them the least.
Get them over with.
Yeah. Then I'd have the potato and then I'd have the meat last because that was the reward for eating the whole thing. And so there is that psyche, isn't there? And you see it on television too. Like you see, all these sort of ochre, ads for lamb that are all blokey and like, oh yes, look how,
And barbecues.
Yeah. Classic too. Like, There's always, the alpha male with his tongs on top of the barbecue.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, it's the way our society works. So I do feel I'm kind of bucking the trend, if you like, or bucking what is normal, although the trend is changing a bit, isn't it?
I totally agree. I had a very surprising moment, I think maybe a week or two ago, where I was able to go to McDonald's and order a vegan burger.
And How was it?
It was actually pretty good. It was that typical sort of McDonald's offering where it looks like food, but you kind of know that it's just looks like food. It's not actual nutrition, but it gave me this sort of childhood nostalgia of eating at McDonald's.
Yes.
And I think at the moment it's only a limited time thing. I think they're saying they're only going to have it until November as a trial. But I would love to see more plant-based stuff enter the mainstream, right? Because much like you, like if you're out with a group of friends, right? And all of a sudden, it's not very hard to walk past McDonald's while you're out and about and duck in for something to eat. And I'd always be like, "Yep, cool, I'll have some chips." You know what I mean?
But they could do a plant-based milkshake too, couldn't they?
They could. And I think that the consciousness and the demand for it is definitely increasing. Like, I think it is becoming more and more popular, and it's really, for me, because it's such a big passion of mine, right, I find it really sort of reassuring that things are changing.
Well, for you and me, the passion started with caring about other species who we identify with in terms of their ability to feel pain and joy, and just like we do. There are people who become vegan because they care very much about the environment, and they've studied the impact of livestock on the land, and how a lot of livestock are fed on grains that could equally feed much more efficiently human beings.
Yep.
And there are other people who believe it is much better for our health than, increasingly red meat is looked at as dubious, and we know that there are a lot of antibiotics in a lot of the other high production raised animals that is not good for our health. So some people go vegan for that reason. I like to think it's all three for me.
Yes. And it feels authentic, doesn't it? It really does come back down to, because I know that there were, in the tail end of my history of eating meat, right, I would eat a meal and just not feel good. I would sit there going, "Oh gosh, what sort of life did this animal lead?" And it was just impossible to enjoy it. And so I think whatever reason that people have for a plant-based diet, for a vegan diet, as long as it makes you feel authentic, then that's really what it comes down to, doesn't it?
Or healthy. You see, there's a naturopath chapter in the book, and he helps a lot of people with cancer. He works with their oncologist, so he's not, so I think some people think it's very, very dangerous to go off on some alternative journey when you really need chemo and an operation, etc. So he's not doing that. He's working with the oncologist, with the radiologist, but he's very strong on the whole food, plant-based diet for our health. That's his push. And I know someone else who is very much in that. It doesn't even talk about the animal side of it.
Yep.
So there are different ways to come at plant-based.
All very valid ones, all very good ones. We will wrap it up there, Alix. Thanks so much for having for being on the show.
Well, it's been great. As you can tell, I'm quite enthusiastic about the subject, so I'm happy to talk about it. And thank you so much for having me.
Definitely.
It's really a book. I think it's not people talk about my book, but I think it's a book about the people I interviewed who are all so helpful to the rest of us on how we can feel better. Feel more energetic.
I think it's inherently human to collaborate. I'm such a big fan of it. Now, the book is called Energy for Life. Do you want to show the audience this one?
Energy for Life.
Now, it's quite widely distributed too, isn't it?
I've seen it and you can get
Dymocks,
it on Kindle, and you can get Dymocks and Booktopia and bookshops, and And it was actually, I had friends who were traveling who sent me photographs from all the airports around Australia. We seem to be in every airport. Published by a firm press, and they are just a delight to work with. Speaking of collaboration, they're wonderful.
Fantastic. And how can we find you on the internet too? Oh, sorry, I interrupted.
On the internet?
Yeah.
You mean Alix Bradfield, Energies for Life is on Google. And yes, I do have an Instagram,
yes.
Alix.Bradfield, with me. Someone took a photograph of me leaping off a rock onto a beach, indicating much energy. So
it's a great photo. I do know that one.
Yes. So I thank you for having me, Ben.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on. Have a good one.